Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the DFS Down Under Show. A little special intro to this particular stream today because due to the fact we had some technical difficulties with the live stream, myself and Hef had some troubles to start with, but let's kick up the action on where Big Hef and I managed to get back online, enjoy the show, and let's get stuck into some footy. There he is. Are you back? Oh,
No.
sorry to all the viewers out there. Sorry. Look at the comments flying in right now saying, is that what you're saying about the club? So I'm talking away. Hef's there just frozen on my screen. I'm sorry about that. So, look, we're back. So, welcome, Hef, to the show. Thank you for joining us. How are you going this week, mate?
Well, after your third place effort on the weekend, Smatho, I knew I was in the hot seat here, but I didn't think you were going to kick me off straight away. I was talking away thinking, what's going on here? Smatho's frozen, but obviously it was my issues, but I'm back. I'm here. I'm ready. I was just saying they're getting their money's worth out of us with all these Thursday night games. Another 2 games to preview tonight. Looking forward to it. A few different teams that we haven't dealt with. It's a bit different not dealing with Geelong and Richmond every week, so This should be good.
Yes. Interesting show coming up. Looking forward to breaking down these 2 games. Before we get into the main part of the show, we always give a shout out to our golden ticket winners here for the Draftstars AFL $300,000 live final. Let me bring up our recent winners from last week, and as you can see, not many names this week because the blokes like Split Tens who absolutely dominated the Thursday. And then, Liam Swan, who we both know down here in Tasmania, he cleaned up both Friday and also Saturday, Sunday, I do believe.
Saturday, Sunday, I think you're right. We have talked about him on the show before because he lost a ticket on adjustments from memory earlier in the season. So good on him for finally getting in there. See, Matty Lee cleaned up in the basketball today too, Smatho.
Yeah, so that's why his name is there for. So look out on Playbook. I've actually caught up with Matty Lee before the NBA slate the night before, and he was quite hopeful that he was going to get a second ticket. So he was on the blower straight away today when he received his second golden ticket, saying, "Mate, we might have to do another interview." So, but well done today, all those golden ticket winners. We're down, I believe, around 33 tickets to go. I might have to find out from Draftstars there. But look, guys, we're getting into the business end now. So 2 thumbs up for those winners, for those particular winners. But, it's starting to get a bit exciting now. We're only, it's the 7th of July at the time of recording. We're nearly just a month away from the Draftstars live final.
Excellent.
Now, Hef, let's get stuck into some daily fantasy AFL action. And as always, brought to you by Draftstars, Australia's #1 daily fantasy platform, but we also use dailyfantasyrankings.com.au, which is our go-to resource for playing AFL DFS, which is also your free cheat sheets, free previews. It's all there at dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. All right, first match, Port Power playing the Melbourne Demons, a 7:40 p.m. start in Adelaide. Currently, the Power are $1.80 favourites, so it's quite tight, the market here. 2.5 line and 149.5, which is kind of a lowish total in these particular previews that we were doing this year. The weather in Adelaide's partly cloudy into a cool evening, so there's no actual issues with the weather. So we start Thursday with a $75,000 contest on Draftstars. First prize just over $7,400 with 125 max entry list. Let's have a quick look at the teams. Zach Butters is back for Port Adelaide along with Tom Cleary. Out goes Kane Farrell, who did his knee, and Bonner is being omitted. As for Melbourne, they brought back Ben Brown for Tommy Sparrow, which is not really a like-for-like there, Hef. So what do you make of those changes?
Yeah, interesting that that move from Melbourne. Melbourne's just spluttering a bit at the moment, aren't they? So decided to change things up in the forward line. Maybe makes the midfield rotation a little bit crisper. In terms of Port Adelaide, Butters will be interesting to see how much they play him through the midfield first up, because he came on in a blaze of glory earlier in the season, didn't he, before he had that injury, and he was spending a lot of time through the middle of the ground. So he replaces Farrell, who wasn't getting as much time. It might have a little bit of impact on Connor Rosie, potentially. And then Cleary replacing Bonner gives them a little bit of a bigger body back there, Port Adelaide. So, yeah, a little bit to consider there when looking at those changes.
Yeah, not as straightforward as would you think, as Hef kindly just said just now. But also, we also get on the DFR to check out the tools, and also I check out the points against tool on the site. And these are my notes for this matchup. So the Demons give up the second highest fantasy points to premium midfielders in their last 5 games. So you think they've got a Rolls-Royce midfield of Petrarca and Oliver, but they're giving points back up for the opposition. The Demons are still a wasteland for opposition ruckman, 50 fantasy points per game in the last 5 games on average. Power are last in the lead for opposition midfielder fantasy points in their last 5 games, so they've been very restrictive to their opposition, and the Demons are number 1 in the league for contested possessions. So considering a lowish line there of 149.5, we could get more of a contested game there, Hef.
Absolutely. Looks like that is what's going to happen with these two teams. You notice that, well, Melbourne have been giving up points to midfielders, but when you sort of look at the numbers, they're both teams are very good at restricting outside ball and uncontested possession. So it does turn into a bit of a contested slog. And, I'd be surprised if one team got too far in front of the other in this one. But I did find it a bit hard to work out. Port Adelaide are obviously going to be very hard to beat at home. Melbourne, like I said, spluttering a little bit, but we saw Geelong go over there and beat Port not too long ago. So should be an absolute ripper of a contest.
Will be a ripping looking. I've got the splutters on tonight, Hef. I reckon the old freezing intro has absolutely rattled me tonight. So you might have to just carry me on my shoulders, even after my, good fortune last week, which obviously the viewers didn't really hear about. But, mate, you might have to carry me tonight. I might say less words and more spluttering might work. Less spluttering, more words. You never know. But let's just get straight into this game. So, Power versus Demons, Thursday night, 7:40 p.m. As always, we start here with a ruckman. And name tonight was Max Gawn at 15,490 to go along with Luke Jackson at 9,490 for the Demons. Scotty Lycett at 12,590. And, mate, this is a tough matchup for Scott Lycett. As we said the tour before, 50-point average in his last 5. I did notice that Lukey Jackson's starting to get a little bit more midfield centre bounce work, as the tools say on DFR.
Yeah, 40% last week. And it's not like they were just giving him a bit of extra time when they were winning, because they lost that game, obviously, to the Giants. So interesting, the 60-40 split, the closest those two ruckmen have been all season, Gawn and Jackson. So I don't know if they'll quite look like that this week, because Lycett is a very strong ruckman at his best. We know he's done some decent jobs almost tagging the likes of Brodie Grundy before. So I don't think he's going to be any pushover for Max Gawn. I think they're going to use Gawn predominantly and just have Jackson chop him out, not as much as they did last week. So like you showed in those numbers you put up, it's going to be really hard for Lycett going up against Gawn. He's only $3,000 cheaper. Usually when we look at these ruck matchups and we've got one guy with the keys all to himself, we tend to lean that way, but I think I'd be leaning Max Gawn here and spending a little bit extra.
I'm kind of going a different way with Luke Jackson here. I think those numbers are encouraging in terms of getting more hit outs, more work around the ground. They'll try and overdo Lycett. I don't think I'll have Lycett at any teams at all. They're just those historical numbers are crap. I've gone back a couple of years ago to see if there's anything that Lycett had a great game against Melbourne, but there's just nothing there. Even Latham struggled against Melbourne a couple of seasons ago. So, but I want to save money this slate. I don't think there's much value that I'm very confident with. So, Lukey Jackson for me. You can take Gawn, which is fine, but Luke Jackson for me for now. Okay. All right, let's move on to the defence. And, so Melbourne starting to leak to opposition back. So this brings Port back into play. Darcy Byrne-Jones is the standard at 12,300 here. But then we have a plethora of players, including Dan Houston, Jonas, Leinart, Alialir, Trent McKenzie, and Ryan Burton, all around that 10 to 11K mark there. So I'm really keen on Port backs here, as the numbers suggest. Any ones that I should be really taking a good look at?
Oh, it's a bit of the night, a bit of the usual suspects, really, for Port Adelaide, isn't it? This back line. Dan Houston's always the most popular one. Sub 12,000 seems really reasonable for him. Obviously, you can play him as a mid. So if you want to go with a really strong backline Port Adelaide flavour to your team, you can throw him in the midfield and pair him up with a couple of defenders here. Leanett was an interesting one coming back into the side last week, and he scored 80 there against the Hawks. I noticed he took a few of the kick-ins. Also shaved his head, so he'd be easy to spot. Put him in a team with Pepe, and you'd be able to cheer home the ball, guys. Trent McKenzie's another guy who took a few kick-ins last week for Port Adelaide. He's reasonably priced considering he's got a number of 70s there. He's a bit infamous in the fantasy community, McKenzie, after a game last year when he looked an easy play and he bombed it completely. So I'm sort of with you. I like the Port defenders. It's hard to really get too excited about Salem because he does like to get the cheaper ball, and Port are quite good at cutting down on that. So at 14,000, it makes him a bit expensive. There's nothing really appealing to me there from Melbourne. But like we said last week with Richmond Gold Coast, there is some value in just going contrarian in these one-game slates, because all you need is Melbourne to take a little bit of a different tact, and they can go against the data. But the safe play is to go with the Port backs.
Yeah, it is pretty safe. I do like Jared Lionheart, as you said, at 10,050. I do think he'll get more of that cheap stuff down back. And then one you haven't touched on is Miles Bergerman. He's been pretty popular here on Draftstars platform. It's almost a little mini back the truck up for me, because we all played him last week at a similar price at around that high $8,000 mark, and did have a 58. So if we're box score watching and people jumping off, surely to blokes like Rivers or even Burton here, I might give Miles another go. Probably will be popular, but not as popular as last week.
He's a pretty impressive young player, Bergman, actually.
Yeah. No, he looks good. He's a good footy player. All right, let's move on to mids. So, as old Jamie suggests, and we've kind of picked up the theme up here, NTW, nighttime wines. It's almost tiny. Well, he's definitely nighttime wines. When he plays under lights there at Adelaide Oval, he goes absolutely bananas. But is he turning into the wine low, as some people say? He's almost nearly favourite for the Brownlow manual. So we've got him here at $17,030. Draftstars viewers love it here. The old nighttime ones. 151 last week. Absolutely huge performance. Huge price tag. What are your general thoughts to try and get our NTW, the wine low, the nighttime wines into our sides?
Well, yeah, I'm not here to say it's bad by any stretch. We did, as you showed, the premium midfielders against Melbourne have been coming to the party. We talked about contested possession. That's the type of game we're expecting. That's Melbourne do tend to give up a bit more contested ball than uncontested, looking at the tools. So, and the guy that always fits the bill here is Ollie Wines. 17,000 is we're starting to get pretty high. It doesn't look that big when you got a couple of 150s under his belt, but let's just remember that was against Hawthorn last week, which is nothing to write home about. And the other one was against the Gold Coast, was just has come back a little bit with the lower hundreds against some of the better sides. But still, if you can find a way to get Ollie Wines into your lineup at 17,000, I don't think you can go wrong.
I can get him in there. Let's get him in for now.
If you want to go someone cheaper, there was a guy who really stood out to me on price. It's Travis Boak. Had a pretty ordinary game, especially in the first half last week. But one thing you love to see is we've talked about Basher Hooley, how well he runs all the way to the end of the game. Now, Travis Boak ran this game right out. I was obviously following pretty closely, watching to see if Liam got himself a ticket, and he had Boak in his side. He got 5 possessions in the last minute. Now, that's the type of attitude that we love for our fantasy players, and got himself up to the 100. The thing about Boak is he usually, from time to time, he gets a bit of attention, gets someone going with him. That 98 there was on the back of a tag. I Don't think he's going to get the attention here from Melbourne. They're going to go head-to-head, I'm pretty sure. Maybe Harms, but he seems really well priced to be Travis Boak.
Yep. I like him as well. That junk time was sensational last week, watching that unfold in the fourth quarter. So he's in my side as well. I'm going to keep piling into these premium mids. I'm really going to hammer home that data point there on DFR. Carl Amon at 14,280. Also toned up last week against, obviously, it was Hawthorn. That 70 does give me little concerns against Sydney, which is obviously a more contested kind of style of ground, but they're back at home. Plugging him in. And as I scroll down here, there's not much value at all here, Hef. We'll talk about Melbourne options at the moment, but right down the bottom here, Sam Mays at 8,080 seems the logical value choice after being sub for a few games. Gets the full game last week and scores 72, which is around 9x for his salary. Uber chalk, but I don't think I can get away from it.
He is, like you say, there's not many cheaper options there. One thing I will say is that Port Adelaide do give up some points to the main midfielders themselves, and it's usually contested guys. So I think it's pretty obvious to say most of your lineups are going to have one of Petrarca or Oliver in there because they fit the bill and they're a bit cheaper than Wines. The interesting thing to consider is Petrarca. If you go and have a look at their recent history, obviously the form numbers there, we've got Petrarca going bonkers, and we've got Oliver who's a little bit off the boil for whatever reason. There's a few scores under 100 there. So I think when you're just sort of considering what the ownership's going to be, whether people maybe overplay Petrarca, and you don't have to go too far back to see some big scores from Oliver. So something to consider if you're trying to be a little bit different and you're looking for one of those main Melbourne midfielders in the lineup. And just before we go, I'll just touch on the centre bounces rotation there for Melbourne. We've got pretty accustomed to Gawn, Petrarca, Oliver as the main three, and then when Viney comes back, he usually fills that role. But interestingly, there was pretty much a split last week between Viney and Harms. So we've talked about at different times Harms being affected by Viney coming back. Last week, it was pretty much a split there in the middle.
Very interesting. Yeah, look, I do like your point on Oliver. That 155 came against the Crows at Adelaide Oval, so he does have good memories of that particular ground. But I really like Port in this matchup, so in goes Sammy Mays in there. I can't see, look, maybe Bergman if you want to fit some more defensive Port players, but yeah, that looks pretty chalky to me. Let's move on to forwards. Now, game total only set at 149, so I'm not going to go real berserk here on key forwards such as blokes like Dixon or maybe possibly Stevie Motlop, but I do like him in this particular slate. But the one that will make or break you almost, if you do have the salary, Zach Butters there at 11,310. Fresh back in the team. Some great ceiling scores there. 119 there back in March. But first up, could see a lot of people go away from Zach.
Yeah, and probably I'm sort of a bit like that as well with Butters just at the 11,000. I find him hard to play too much of first up. Like we've seen, like this probably doesn't mean anything. We've seen Danger eased his way back into it. Jared Berry was a guy who came back in the weekend off a long layoff and did pretty poor. I'd be limiting my exposure to Butters just from that basis. I think he might affect Rosie. Rosie's had they've always been keen to get Rosie into that midfield rotation. When Butters was up and firing earlier in the year, Rosie wasn't really getting much of a look in. Last week he only had a few centre bounces. He's still been playing predominantly forward, but Butters in the team, that's just probably hurts him a little bit more. So Rosie, I'm pretty wary of as well. I think you're right. It might be a game to go pretty cheap in your forward line here, Smatho. What have you got for us?
Well, with 9,000 average there, I am going to go with the ceiling potential of Stevie Motlop. 79 against the Hawks last week. That 110 still lingers from the Gold Coast game. Sure, look, it is a 2.5 line, so this could blow up with me, but considering I've spent all my cash in the midfield in a contested game, I could get up to Power Pepper and all that, but that means I'm down here with Spargo. So I'd like Stevie up here at 9,460, and maybe a choice between either Todd Marshall or Kaiser Pickett. Not really liking both of them. Marshall did have an injury-affected score of 1 a couple of weeks back there, so that's kept his price pretty low. So if we can get like a little 60 or a 70 there, or 77, then yeah, that's another 8-9x for my team. So there he goes, little port stack for you on the show this evening.
One thing, yeah, we haven't given much love to the Demons here, but one thing I will mention, just in terms of the back line there for Melbourne, we know Stephen May is probably likely to go to Dixon. They do have enough to cover Marshall and Georgiades in there as well, with Harrison Petty and Lever, both tall enough to handle those guys down back. I was thinking maybe if Marshall cops the second one, they might let Georgiades get off the chain, but they do have enough to cover him there, Melbourne.
Yeah. So obviously I've gone here a pretty port stack there.
It's a full stack, let's be honest.
Yeah, it's a full stack, but I think we had the weighted prices from Draftstars this week, along with, Ollie Wines and the Sam Mays at 8,000. Yeah, you can get different from that, but yeah, the more I looked at it today, just the more I keep coming back to port players.
Let's go left field quickly. Melbourne forwards.
Yes.
It wasn't long ago we saw Cameron, Rowan, and Hawkins all turn up there for Geelong. So Ben Brown is back in the team. He's a really cheap option. Is it possible that he's a bit big for this Port Adelaide backline? We know Jonas tends to shy away from taking the big job, and we get left with Cleary and McKenzie, who are both undersized. I think you could, as sort of bad as he's been going, Ben Brown, I think you could sort of make a little case for him, and I think his presence maybe gets a bit of attention off Tom McDonald as well. So they're more contrarian plays, especially if you're all in on Port like Smatho is, but I think they're worth considering. And actually, Pickett, like you mentioned, Pickett, he's going through a bit of a down patch, Pickett, but earlier in the season he was going a bit better for that 8,000 price, but all their nasty scores there, aren't they?
Nasty scores, and Jamie reckons that their team misses the cut. So, look, good feedback. Great feedback there. So
let's move on.
Let's move on. All right, so let's talk about, let me bring this up. Oh, I've gone the wrong one. Bombers versus Crows on a Friday night. Another $75,000 contest available from Draftstars. Currently, the Bombers are $1.30 favourites for this particular match at Marvel Stadium. Line's 19.5 and the total's 163.5. Looks like a fresh, cold night there at Marvel. Low temperatures. Didn't hear anything about the roof being open or shut this week, but you never know. But there is no rain on the forecast, so we should be fine for conditions in Melbourne. As we're recording here on Wednesday night, we don't have the full team list for this particular match, but we do have some team news from both camps, including the big news that Dyson Heppel has been ruled out with surgery on his thumb. He's out for this particular match. Tex Walker is questionable for this particular match as well, after suffering quite a nasty neck injury last week. Luke Brown has also a test on his Achilles injury. They've been trying to manage him all year, and it's kind of getting to the stage that he might have to miss a game. And Tom Lynch, who played in the twos last week, he got through that, played pretty well, and might be available for selection this week. So,
do you reckon they'll play him as the sub, Smatho?
the redemption sub with his shoes, with his boots ready to go. Oh, that'd be classic. They do that. They do that. There's a $75,000 contest, as I mentioned on Draftstars. $7,415 first prize, the high roll, the mini, the micro. It's all there for us. Now, my notes here from Daily Fantasy Rankings, the number one resource for all of your DFS needs for AFL. Let me bring up my notes for the Crows and the Bombers. So the Crows are the third stingiest side of the league in the last 5 games for opposition ruck. So O'Brien's doing a really good job there, limiting his opposition fantasy scoring. The Crows are last in the league for possessions accumulated. Only 1 ton scored last round against the Lions. Bombers allowed plenty of fantasy points to opposition backmen. Last week, they let 3 ton scores last week from the Cats. And the Crows in the last 5 games, they've given up an average of 75 points per player, which is number 2 in the league. So it sets up to be Crows don't get fantasy points. They give up lots of fantasy points. It's almost like a Gold Coast / North Melbourne kind of setup here. So what are your initial thoughts on this particular slate before we get cracking through the teams?
My initial thoughts are $1.30 Essendon is generally pretty scary to me. I do like the Bombers when their backs are against the wall a bit and they play a bit of run and gun and throw the ball around a bit. When they're expected to win, I think it's a bit of a different story for Essendon. So I'll be interested to see how they deal with that sort of expectation. I think a lot of it will come down to whether Tex Walker can get up. I think they look a bit plain up forward without him, Adelaide, so that'll be interesting. And just on that team news with Heppel out of the side, I think that's going to open up some opportunity down back if we're looking to play a couple of Bombers backs.
Well, I'm back again. More technical difficulties occurred at this point of the podcast, so let's pick it up again where I managed to jump back on with Hef introducing the Adelaide Crows and the Bombers matchup.
While you're mucking around, let's talk rucks, because you did talk about Riley O'Brien there and how well he's going at restricting opposition ruckmen. He comes up against Sam Draper from Essendon, who we talked about last week actually in the game against Geelong, that he's getting all the ruck time to himself and Peter Wright's getting staffed up forward. We also mentioned how Draper's been quite leaky to opposition ruckmen, and so I think 12,000 is a pretty good price for Riley O'Brien. I could sort of make a case for Draper at 9,000, considering he is lone rucking, basically. But yeah, I think paying up for O'Brien is the play here. We look to be joined by Smatho again. No, we haven't got him yet. Well, he's still ticking over. Here he is.
I'm still ticking over. All right.
I've crushed the
Thanks
rucks.
Thanks for filling it. Crushed the rucks. Who are we playing?
Pretty easy ruck play, I think. Riley O'Brien for me. I'm not overthinking this one. I think he's spot on.
Excellent. All right. Sorry the viewers there. I did drop out. I'm back on a new different Wi-Fi setting, so let's see how we go there. If I drop out, sorry again, but we'll see how we go. So the backs. Can the Crows backmen accumulate enough footy down back to be fantasy relevant in this plum of a matchup? The Bombers do give up a little bit, but with no Heppel for the Bombers, this should give opportunity for Hind and for Ridley. So is there anyone from the Bombers outside of those particular two that we could target, or should we look at some Crows options?
I think you could maybe look at some Mason Redman as well. He's a guy that can sort of chip in with a bit of that mark kick stuff that we love from our defenders. Apart from that, yeah, I think they're the three that I'd prefer to work around. I'm not in love with any of the cheaper guys there. In terms of Crows, I think the standout to me is Brodie Smith. He sort of fits the bill of those defenders that are going pretty big against the Bombers in recent weeks. He's taking majority of the kickouts. Especially if Luke Brown doesn't get up. He was the only other guy to take kickouts last week. So you see a couple of tons there in his last 4 for Brodie Smith at a price tag of 11.3. I think that's really reasonable.
Excellent. All right, I might put in Redmond. Just need to save some cash for the midfield. I mentioned earlier in the DFR tools that the Crows are the last in the league for possessions accumulated. Roy Laird has bucked this trend by posting 5 consecutive fantasy tons in a row, and then Ben Key's run of 100-plus scores ended last week with a 91 against the Lions. Look, both of these are priced pretty high, both at, 16,000 for Keys and 15,790. Would you be looking at either of these two to go against this Bombers midfield?
Yeah, I wouldn't be too too scared to take on the Bombers midfield. There's no real taggers there. Interesting, these two teams have got really tight centre bounce rotations. We're talking Draper, Parrish, Merritt, and the String Dog for Essendon. The last couple of weeks, they've totally dominated the centre bounces, and Adelaide have pretty much settled on O'Brien, Keys, Sloan, and remember who that last bloke is? Laird, obviously. Obviously Laird. So, yeah, Seedsman's hasn't affected his scoring a great deal, Seedsman, but he's been kicked out to the wing. The only other guy getting a little sniff in there is Harry Schellenberg, who's he's clearly the fifth guy now in those rotations. So if you have a look at him around 8,000, there's no scores there really jumping out at you, but he's pretty consistent, and he's starting to hit pretty good numbers at an $8,000 salary. If he can get you a 70 with that sort of time he's getting in the middle of the ground, he's pretty handy. If we're talking cheap guys though here, Smatho, we got lots of obvious expensive guys, but if you scroll right down to the bottom, there's a youngster who caught my eye in his debut game, Luke Pedler.
Yes.
He's in there at 5,500. He scored a 49. He's got a lot of pace. Very similar price to Sam Berry, but he seems a bit more of a ball winner than Berry. I think he's going to be really popular because you can obviously spend up on guys like Parrish, Merritt, Laird, Keys. So 5.5. I think he's going to be really popular, Pedler, but I think he's a really good play.
Any of these Bombers guys, just before we move on, Nick Cox, disappointed again last week with a 7.9. Could there be a little bounce back kind of play here for us?
Well, you did include him last week, Smatho, in your lineup. I'm not sure your internet can stand up for a little back the truck up video, but I think he's had 3 pretty bad games in a row here, Cox, but he does have a proper ceiling. We know he's had that 104, he's had that 83. Earlier in the season, he had a 93. There's some pretty big scores there, and this is a pretty decent fantasy matchup for him. So he's a guy that's right on my radar, Cox. It's risky, but I think the reward is definitely there.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to fill it out here with both Parrish and Merritt. Hopefully that gives me enough money here for the forwards. We're likely going to get a lot of Jake Stringer getting clicked here in the forward line at 12,890, and it's well deserved too. Look, he's got 112, 97, 136 in his last 3 games. As I said, he tends all the CBAs that he likes. I'm going to squeeze him in with other options in this particular matchup, but definitely in play. So let's talk about the other players that could be in play in this particular slate, considering that we probably won't have Tex Walker. Maybe Tom Lynch is a bit underdone. If you scroll down, no Elliot Hebog, no Stengel. Our most expensive Crow forward is James Rowe at 7,660. Could we play anyone from the LA Crows at all at these prices?
Well, that's a worry, isn't it? Tommy Hawkins got a hold of James Stewart last week. They're trying out Stewart down back, and it's not working, to be honest. If you watch him play, he looked like a witch's head out there. But if Tex Walker does get up for the game, I'm happy to have some of him at 10,000. If he's not there, then I don't know who their main guy is going to be. Maybe it's going to be the youngster Riley Tilthorpe at 7,000. He also plays a bit of backup ruck time, which can help him out there on his scores. But there's really not much on offer here, is there? They might bring back Fogarty, actually.
Now, Fogarty is at 5,560.
Now, anyone who remembers the last live final would know the name Darcy Fogarty because he stepped up and kicked a few goals against the Eagles in that game. He's got a pretty awful run of scores there, but he can kick a few goals at 5,500. So if you're spending up on your midfield and you're looking for a cheap forward, if he comes in for Tex Walker, I think he's in a reasonable spot.
It just means I can get Stringer in. And there's my side. Fogarty, Stringer, Luke Pedler, Nick Cox, Parshy, Merritt, Brodie Smith, Redmond, Riley O'Brien. I reckon that's a very GPP lineup, that particular one. I wouldn't be throwing that in any of my double ups or 6-mans or head-to-heads there, but as I said, if you want to get that ticket, you got to risk it to get the biscuit. Now, any final thoughts on this particular match before we wrap up the show, Hef?
You got to tune into those teams, obviously, but it's a pretty fun game actually for Friday night. Essendon Crows. You've got a tick there in the chat too, Smatho, for that lineup.
Very good. It's my better effort. There you go. Better effort. Thanks, Jamie. Look, apologies again for the technical difficulties with the show. We'll have to try and splice and dice this particular stream now on the next probably 7 hours of my technical ability. So thanks for all the viewers and the watchers of the show tonight. Hef, thanks for joining me this evening. Thanks for all your input under trying circumstances.
Always trying circumstances, just more so than usual tonight, Smatho. Thanks to everyone in the chat. Good luck and see you next week. We'll
catch you next edition of the DFS Down Under Show. Another Thursday game, so another 2 games next week. Looking forward to breaking that down. I believe there's another Cats game there, Hef. So
great. We had a week off. We're due for them.
Excellent. Well, thanks
Cats
a lot.
Out of the bag on danger too.
Oh, yes. Yes. Cats out of the bag. Made me some money. Thanks very much. All right, Hef. Thanks very much. We'll see you next week. Cheers, mate.
See you, mate.